What happened?
All right, we'll be starting in just a few minutes. I want to check in with our panel. Alex, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, but I'm trying to.
Kyle?
I can hear you very well.
Kyle,
Yeah, Brian, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep, you sound good. Tony?
Just fine.
All right, great. Brennan?
I'm here.
All right. So we have attendees joining us. The broadcast will go live in just a couple of minutes here, but we'll wait till the bottom of the hour, and then I'll turn it over to you guys. And when you're ready, I'll pull up the slides.
Sounds good.
And you can see I've got a timer view that will allow the public to see how much time they have left when we get to that part of the program.
Brian, can you hear me?
We can hear you, Alex. Yes.
Okay.
Guess I should turn on my video. There I am.
Can you see me?
We can see you just fine.
Yep, we can see everybody.
All right.
We have about 20 people in the audience right now and over 80 signed up to participate tonight.
Woo.
So I'm sure that number will go up as we get started.
Brian, is it all right for me to reference at the end that we'll be sending an email out with that link?
Yes.
Okay.
If you make the promise, I'll have to deliver. All right, gentlemen, it is 5:30 and the webinar is being broadcast right now on Facebook for the city's Facebook page, on Twitter, and on our Boxcast streaming site. And I'll turn it over to you. We're ready to start the Preston and Grady intersection public engagement meeting.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Alex Ikefuna, NDS Director, and the meeting tonight is about the Preston and Grady Intersection Improvement Project. The city is proposing to submit funding consideration to Virginia Department of Transportation in the next couple of months. The comments received tonight will be reviewed by staff, the city's engineering staff, as part of the application process. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Brennan Duncan, who is the city's traffic engineer. Brennan.
Yeah. Do we have the presentation up, Brian?
Yeah, I can bring that up. Okay, it's up and visible.
All right. So we can go ahead and skip to the first screen here.
Give me just a, there we go.
All right. So we'll start again, the agenda for this, we'll kind of go through the purpose of this project, its history, background, and then go more into a little specifics about the smart scale process, its overview, the scope of this particular improvement projects and kind of next steps, and then we'll get to the bulk of this meeting, which will be the question and comment period. Next slide. All right. So the purpose of this project was to create a multimodal, community-focused improvements to increase safety and enhance operations for all users at the intersection of Preston Avenue, Grady Avenue, and 10th Street. Really, this intersection especially was one, it was the #1 intersection in the Streets That Work project that the city went through back probably 3 or 4 years ago now. I guess that started 5 or 6 years ago, 3 or 4 when we finalized it. And really, this is kind of the culmination of a lot of that public engagement of saying, this is the one intersection in the city that is the worst and needs the most work. So we're trying to put together a proposal in order to address a lot of the concerns there. Next slide. So this is kind of the overall intersection limits. We go, a little ways out of the main intersection down each of the roads, down Grady, 10th, Preston, just so that, we can tie into any of the infrastructure that's there, whether that be stormwater, curb and gutter, those types of things. But this is really the area that we're looking at for this particular project with intersection improvements. So again, the history, background for this project, it really ties into, it goes all the way back to the 60s when Preston was widened. And this intersection was kind of, the end point of that widening. And it's kind of left this kind of weird conglomeration of roads where they come together that's not efficient. It's not good for vehicles. It's not good for pedestrians. And again, with this being the highest intersection priority in the city, we're trying to come up with that project that'll address a lot of those concerns. Again, we had mentioned the streets that work, priority intersections, Grady, Preston, 10th and Preston, priority corridor, which this ties into. So Preston Avenue corridor, which this isn't. This is really just the intersection project, but it's the endpoint for kind of the Preston Avenue corridor and the endpoint for the 10th Street corridor. So both of those are top 10 corridors as well. It's on the bicycle and pedestrian master plan. Again, we had mentioned, and we've already heard a lot of comments about the barriers to walking and biking over to, Washington Park, up and down the corridor through this intersection. Again, it's a very just bad layout for this intersection. So that's really what we're trying to do here is, eliminate a lot of those concerns in this process. If I can remember what this slide was. I think these were just all the comments that we received, this is the crash data at this intersection. As you can see, there's quite a few accidents. So safety is one of the main things that we're trying to address with this, as well as, with the weird orientation, it leads to a lot of driver uncertainty of what's going on, and results in multiple accidents. This is within the prior 5 years of when the last study was done. So this would have been 2013 through 2018. I'll turn it over to Kyle and he'll handle the rest of the presentation here.
Thanks, Brendan. I'm Kyle Kling, Transportation Project Manager with the Department of Public Works and the project manager for this particular project. I'll start off by giving everyone an overview of the Smart Scale process. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Smart Scale is a grant program that's administered by the Virginia Department of Transportation that focuses on assisting localities fund projects that will ultimately help the state meet its transportation goals.
Oops, sorry about that. Let me back up.
You're fine. In general, projects are evaluated in an objective and transparent manner, which I will detail here in a couple slides for everyone. The nice thing about this program is that it is entirely state and federally funded, meaning that any elements of the project that are reimbursable, the city can resubmit those costs back to VDOT and be refunded for those costs. Next slide, Brian. So the Smart Scale process is extremely competitive with only a limited amount of funding available for award each cycle. It's on a 2-year cycle. As part of this project, the Preston and Grady project, we will be applying for funds as part of what VDOT calls the Construction District Grant Program. More or less what that means is that the project will be evaluated against other applications coming from the same construction district. In this case, our construction district is the Culpeper District. We anticipate in having about $20 million in available funding within that district for this cycle. For how these applications are evaluated, VDOT takes a look at these applications and uses 6 different factors to evaluate each project. Those 6 factors are safety, congestion mitigation, accessibility, environmental quality, economic development, and land use. Each of those measures are given a measured value, and those are calculated and weighted. After those weighted totals have been summed together, a final score or a final, I guess, coefficient is determined, and that is divided by the project cost or the anticipated project cost, which are then ranked within each district. The projects that have the highest rankings are those that are recommended for funding. I think more or less what this means is that you got to have a really good understanding of what a project's going to entail in order to submit it for funding. And what we've also found based on the past cycles is that smaller projects such as intersection improvements tend to score a lot better than larger projects, which have very vast components and higher budgets. To give you guys some reference, in the last cycle, round 3, there were 42 applications submitted in the Culpeper District, and only 6 projects were selected for funding. Next slide, Ren. Here is an overview of the scorecard for our last submittal of this project back in 2018. As you can see, it details each of those measured components, each factor and those measured values. VDOT does have a very complex document, which is published online, that details these more and how these are scored. I think the big takeaway from this slide here is that this project really focuses on improving the safety at the intersection. As you can see, that score was one of the highest factors that scored well in the last round, as well as it really allowed access to the increased economic development projects that are going on within the city and surrounding Albemarle County. Next, I'll touch base on what we're proposing for improvements at this intersection. As you can see on the slide here, the project will consist of intersection improvements that are going to focus on improving the operations of the roadway, vehicular movements, and then lastly, really focus on improving bicycle and pedestrian safety and multimodal connectivity. Some of the more detailed improvements that we are proposing with this project is we anticipate a realignment of Preston Avenue to consolidate the existing signals, 2 signals that are out there, into one signal, one centralized signalized intersection. We anticipate modifying vehicular lanes in order to minimize conflicts and increase overall efficiency of the traffic operations along the corridor. We will be proposing to incorporate full signal equipment upgrades, including pedestrian signals for all legs of the intersection and revised pedestrian crossings at the intersections to either reduce crossing widths or provide additional protection in the form of pedestrian refuge. And then install a new curb and gutter within the entire duration of the project's limits. As I mentioned, installation of pedestrian refuge islands will also be part of the project as well. We understand that some of those crossings that are being proposed are a little bit longer, so we anticipate mitigating that by installing those islands. As I mentioned a couple slides ago, bicycle facilities, improving those is a priority for this project, so those will be implemented into this project as well. as well as upgrading the existing transit facilities that are within the intersection. And then lastly, just improving access to the local businesses along the corridor. We know it's pretty tough getting in and out of there during peak hours currently. So looking at different techniques that can be implemented to help reduce those conflicts that currently exist. Going forward, the next steps for this project. So we have earlier today, we launched a project survey that is available on the project website. As you can see on the screen here, we included a direct link to that as well. We anticipate having that up for 2 weeks, and we can email this link out to everyone as well upon conclusion of this webinar. So everybody has that. Very high level questions. We're just trying to solicit some general feedback, not trying to get into anything too specific at the moment. We just want some general feedback from those who are interested in the project. Over the next month, we'll review that feedback and refine the application ahead of the August 3rd application deadline. Continuing after that August 3rd deadline, the comprehensive plan for the city will continue to be amended. There's currently a consultant working on that. It's my understanding that a draft is anticipated towards the end of this year, with a final amendment coming sometime in the fall of 2021. The award for the applications will be announced in spring of 2021. And then one big thing we really want to stress is that if this project is awarded funding, we will not be seeing any of those funds available to the city for use until at least 2025 or 2026. So we're still 5 or 6 years out from this from any further design work on this project, which gives us a lot of time to gather more feedback and really refine what we want to do out there at the intersection. And then as we move through this process, similar to what we have done with prior smart scale projects, is once we receive funding and get authorization to move forward with the project from VDOT, we'll really have a more robust public outreach phase where we'll have public open houses, public workshops, things of that nature, which will really allow us to dive into some of those finer details that people have been asking questions about over the past month or so. And at this time, that concludes our part of the presentation. We'd like to open it up to any general comments or questions from here on out.
Great. And one thing I'd like to point out is that a link to these slides will be made available to all the webinar participants. So you'll get an email with a link both to the survey and to this slide deck. So you have that. Right now we have people who are both asking questions and getting answers in the Zoom webinar Q&A module. So you're welcome to type a question in there if you'd like, and one of our staff can address it. Or you can raise your hand and we'll use the balance of our time to listen to your feedback and answer as many questions as possible until our time runs out, which is at 7 o'clock tonight. We'll give the public who would like to come on the webinar and speak directly to staff 3 minutes for each person. And you can click the raise hand icon in the Zoom webinar. We will call on people in the order in which their hands have been raised. And we have 7 people right now who have raised their hands. We have about 65 people who are attending the webinar. So we appreciate that participation, and we're sorry that we couldn't do it in person. But at the same time, we value your feedback and look forward to the comments as they come up. Alex, anything else we need to say before we start public input?
Yeah, I think we are good, for the questions.
Great. I'm going to switch the view so that the public can see, hopefully, all of our staff as well as the countdown timer. And we'll start calling on people who have raised their hands. And the first person is Christopher Henry. And Christopher, I've enabled your microphone. You're on with staff. You've got 3 minutes.
Hi, Brian. Thank you. Guys, I just wanted to share with the group that what I'm not hearing from the city's traffic engineers is why this is actually the right process to solve the problem that we're trying to solve here. It's an opportunity, I think, for the city to do something a lot bigger and a lot better. It's no surprise that the Preston Grady intersection needs work. Been called out for enhancement since at least 1996, and specifically as part of target area for a small area plan since 2003, and again in a 2013 small comprehensive plan. Why is a small area plan not being done to solicit community feedback before moving forward with a large infrastructure project on this corridor? Good planning practice, not just transportation engineering practice, would hold that the cart is coming before the horse, so to speak. And the over 250 signatures gathered from surrounding neighborhoods and business owners supports this approach versus the city's flawed smart scale application at this time. I would encourage you to take a step back, reconsider the process, and zoom out a little bit and understand how this intersection impacts the surrounding communities, business owners, and larger Charlottesville community. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Brian Campbell. Brian, you're on with city staff. Go ahead. You've got 3 minutes. And you will have to unmute your microphone. We can't hear you yet, Brian. Let me see if I can unmute it for you. Brian, can you hear us now? Okay, Brian's lowered his hand. We'll come back to Brian if he raises his hand again. Next up is Irene Matthew.
Hi.
Irene, go ahead. You've got 3 minutes.
Okay, great. My name's Irene Mattia. Thanks for taking my comment. I'm a resident of 10th and Page, and I'm a pediatrician, so many of my concerns are specifically around safety. We have quite a few children in that neighborhood. As you mentioned, there are a lot of walkers, runners, bikers, and other pedestrians. And so I'm pretty concerned about what seems like a higher volume of traffic that will be diverted through the Grady Avenue rather than down Preston as it currently stands. And there are many people who typically cross Grady in order to socialize across the street, because that is also part of the 10th and Page neighborhood, as well as to access the Booker T. Washington Park. So I'm pretty concerned about the safety issues. When you think about Preston, Preston has the advantage of the houses are pretty set back from the road, and there is a pretty large tree coverage to prevent noise and pollution that we don't have on Grady Avenue. So I'm concerned about all of those exposures for the population here in my neighborhood. And then I'm also wondering about what's going to happen to the traffic when it reaches University Ave at the end of Grady, because that intersection is very small and unwieldy, and having walked and run through that area many times, that's not a high volume intersection at all. So I'm not sure how that is going to work out, and I'd like to hear more about that. And then furthermore, I was just wondering about whether or not the team has considered the historical element of this and the health equity piece, since 10th and Page is historically and still is predominantly a Black neighborhood and a lower income neighborhood compared to Venable, which is where Preston now runs through. And so with an increase in the safety hazards, traffic, and noise pollution, I am concerned about the equity and piece of this and how that's going to impact a community that is already has some challenges. And so I'm pretty concerned about that aspect as well. And I'm wondering if the equity piece of this has been discussed, and if so, how you all see that playing out. So thank you for taking my question.
Thank you. And I'm going to pause right there and see if staff want to address either of the speakers we've heard so far.
Yeah, I can answer a lot of that previous one with regards to traffic being funneled down Grady. I really don't think that will be an issue. That was one of the questions that was typed in the Q&A as well. You know, we have multiple intersections all over the city where the predominant movement is a turning movement. For instance, you know, if you look at Rose Hill and Rugby, if you look at Monticello and Avon, West Main Street where it ties into JPA, you know, if people want to go a direction, they're going to turn, and we can, design that intersection in such a way that where there's plenty of stacking to make those turns. So there may be a few more vehicles, but I really don't anticipate that, there's that 90% of the vehicles that currently go down Preston are just automatically going to switch to Grady. If their destination is further down Preston to Barracks Road, it's way out of the way for them to, continue on Grady, have to go up to the intersection at Grady and Rugby, make a right there. So I just really don't anticipate that the vehicles will make that movement if they don't already do it today. We are aware of the historic impacts of, the widening and the racial disparities that, kind of came of that, why this project stopped where it did. Right now, with the two intersections, without sidewalks and everything else, it's, nearly impossible for the 10th and Page neighborhood to get over to Washington Park. With this proposed improvements, we would be able to reduce that down to one intersection, put, wider sidewalks on all four quadrants, just really enhance the pedestrian and multimodal aspects of this intersection to really reconnect those neighborhoods, reconnect Rose Hill neighborhood to this area as well. So, we are looking at that. I think that this, project has the potential to have a big improvement in those areas.
Thank you, Brandon. We also had a question from Beth Meyer, if there was any follow-up on Christopher Henry's questions when he spoke first.
Yeah, I sent him, he typed those as well, and I sent him a message. We've talked about this in several meetings leading up to this with Mr. Henry. The comprehensive plan is a few years out. The funding for this, even if we get the award for this next year, that's basically just saying that we are approving this project, but the funding is still 5 years out from that point. So we're talking 6 years from today before the funding would be available. And then again, another 3 to 5 years of engineering design. So all of the concepts that we've seen are just that. They're a concept that was developed so that we could establish a budget, not that this is going to be the final design of the project. What we kind of listed in the slides and the bullet points, the multimodal, the pedestrian improvements and signal improvements, those are really the only things that have to be constructed when this project is done according to VDOT. If we decide that we want to change the orientation of where the roads are at, that kind of stuff a little bit, we can do that as long as we meet those criteria that are set forth in the VDOT slide.
So if you're just joining us, staff started the evening with a PowerPoint presentation, which will be available obviously on the archive of this video, but we will also send out a link to everyone joining us via webinar, so you have access to that. Right now we're in the Q&A portion of the evening, and over the next hour we'll take as many questions and comments as we can. Everyone who raises their hand through the Zoom webinar, we'll call on you in the order in which you raised your hands. We have 6 people in line right now. We have about 67 people in the audience. And Don Gathers, you are up next. And so let me enable your mic. Don, you're on with staff. You've got 3 minutes.
Good evening, gentlemen. I've heard a lot about what is going to happen as opposed to what might happen. It sounds like this has already been blessed and written in stone. And I'm wondering, at what point does the thoughts and whims of the people, especially those people who live in that community, where does that come into play? As it was stated, we have some almost 300 signatures that have been collected in this immediate community that are opposed to this. So, and the city has a horrific history of ignoring the whims of the people. And that should be troubling and bothersome to everyone, especially to city staff. We've talked about open houses and workshops, and those are just vehicles to deliver information to us as to what you are going to do, as opposed to hearing from us what it is that we may want you to do, which is the way that a democratic or even a democratic republic government should be functioning. Excuse me, we talked about pedestrian refuge, which I don't have a clue what that is. We talked about reducing the crossing width, which really is nonsensical to me. It seems like if we're concerned about safety, that we would be enhancing that and expanding it. And I'm wondering what exactly, if there's been any concentrated thought about what the driving of this additional traffic through the neighborhood is going to do, even when you go down to the intersection of Wortland and 10th Street, and then continuing on to Main and 10th Street. I think that this is just another avenue to make access easier for UVA, which drives so much of what goes on in the city of Charlottesville. And it's bothersome, it's sickening, especially when they don't even consider themselves part of the city. Everything about them is attached to Albemarle County. And I really wish that at some point the city would consider the wants, the whims, and the wishes of the community, especially those community members that'll be directly and adversely affected by this. Not to mention the small businesses in the immediate area that will be directly impacted by this. You've got Martin's Hardware, you've got Shenandoah Joe's, and you're completely changing the dynamics of just their patrons being able to get in and out of their shops. And I really think that this needs more time, more effort, and more thought behind it. And forget the comp plan. That many residents already consider that was a joke. Not to mention the SIA. And I don't have enough time or energy to devote to giving you my feelings on that. So I really wish that you would consider what you're going to get off this survey and what that petition says that you should be receiving very shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Any responses to Mr. Gather's comments?
Yeah, I'll just add, Brian, as I mentioned briefly in the presentation, is generally the way we've handled these types of engagements in the past has been, once funding has been awarded, that allows the city to not spend its own money, and they can get reimbursed for that cost. Generally, this happens before the design phase, but after the funding is rewarded. To piggyback off of what Brendan has said and what we've been very transparent about the whole time, is that what you're seeing here is just conceptual designs. These are open to change as we move through the public engagement process. So public open houses and public workshops aren't only an opportunity for the city to present information, but they're also an opportunity for us to get good feedback from residents and have face-to-face conversations with them. So that's the route we anticipate taking with this project as well.
And Brian, I just want to add also, if the city gets the funding, there will be a steering committee that will be set up to work with the consultant or whoever is hired to drive the project. And usually the members of the steering committee will come from the neighborhoods surrounding this particular project activity area, as well as businesses. And those members of the steering committee will help in terms of reviewing the designs proposed, providing feedback to the consultants. And then at the end of the process, there is also a mandatory design public hearing. This is not mandated by the city, but by Virginia Department of Transportation. And that mandatory design public hearing is conducted on the resulting designs, and subsequent after that, the result of the public hearing is presented to the City Council for approval. And once it's approved, then it's sent to the Department of Transportation. So there are still huge amount of public engagement process that will provide a platform for the residents in the community, the neighborhood association, the businesses, and maybe public institutions in the area like churches to weigh in terms of the design of the project.
Thank you, Alex. So we're taking a team approach to responding and listening to everyone tonight. So there are a lot of questions coming in through the Q&A module, which is great. And as our staff are answering those, everyone can benefit from the Q&A and see the answers. That's also a good way to get it into the archive of this meeting's materials if you want to document a concern or provide feedback by typing it out. I did see one person who said their microphone was not working, but it looked like your question, Reed Murphy, was answered by Brennan Duncan. If that's not the case, please come back to the Q&A module and we can make sure you get your voice heard. We do have one person on the telephone listening. If you're on the phone and you'd like to participate that way, you can press *9 and that will raise your hand and get you in line to make comments. Right now we have 5 people in line, and next up is Thomas Wong. Thomas, you're on with staff and you've got 3 minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you all for the time to offer some thoughts. I think that the efforts of Public Works Department, the city and Smart Scale team are all laudable. I think we all recognize that a fix is needed. The funding that's offered by Smart Scale is great. It's compelling. We all want a solution, but ultimately we just don't want to squander the opportunity. So really there are 3 things that I wanted to highlight that have kind of been touched on before. First is sort of sensitivity to context and use. Secondly, sort of the safety and flow at the intersection. And ultimately the creation and use of the public space. So with respect to the context and use, I know that Ms. Matthews highlighted the residential on 10th Street or 10th and Page neighborhood and on Grady, and separately Mr. Gathers mentioned commercial along Preston. Preston has been the thoroughfare that connects downtown to Barracks Road forever, right? It's the primary thoroughfare and it feels that a straight line is the right solution. Maintaining that intersection and creating a T with Grady seems to be the right path. And to go against that would be to be antithetical to what has always been there and what would practically be in place. Simplifying it and getting rid of the complexity really should be where we go, right? Residents will be impacted by increased traffic flow and commercial tenants will be impacted by decreased or materially altered traffic flow. So our hope is simplify the intersection, turn it into a T, and that's the right path. With respect to safety and flow, this is a node, it's a gateway, right? And it's an opportunity to, one, funnel the traffic appropriately towards downtown and Barracks Road and preserve the excess green space created by the closure of a couple of, we'll call it spur streets that simplify the intersection, but also create great open space, right? So the idea of by creating those additional green buffers, whether or not it's bricked in streets or it's actual green space, would create greater distance between pedestrian traffic and vehicular traffic and create, a richer environment that, enhances it as a node between downtown, the university, and Barracks Road. And then ultimately the use of the public space. The idea of bricking in, for example, 10th Street extended as it intersects with Preston, or the little spur of Grady that moves in front of Dairy Central would help bring it together with the downtown mall. If you use the similar aesthetic, it makes the downtown district and its extensions a little bit more cohesive. So ultimately, the idea of a T intersection is really what we believe is the right solution, although we're open to any number of options. But I think that simplicity, preserving the priority of Preston, enhancing the neighborhood with softer edges of green space or public space and pedestrian pathways is the right path. So thank you for the time.
Thank you. Any feedback at this point from our panel, or is there anything in the Q&A module you'd like to address?
Yeah, Brian,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, Brian, there's a couple questions in here asking for clarification on what can and cannot be changed based off of what we're proposing. If you can go back to the presentation,
Sure.
Brian, those elements on, I believe the last 2 or 3 slides, the text elements, yeah. These elements that we put in the application are what we'll be kind of forced to adhere to. So some type of realignment to the intersection to create a consolidated intersection, new curb, new sidewalks, new signal equipment. These textual elements are really what we're going to be held to by VDOT. How these play out in terms of what a concept design looks like and how that design is modified within the existing or laid out within the existing intersection is kind of what is up for, I guess, play in this. If we want to shift the lanes a certain direction, I think that's something that we could do as long as these elements are still met in the application.
And then I put up the second slide there, which had some additional improvements. Okay, I'll stop that sharing. And again, we will make this available to everyone via a link after the webinar. Should we take the next person who's raised their hand? Okay, next up is Samuel Carron. Samuel, you're on with staff and you've got 3 minutes. Go ahead. You will have to unmute your microphone. There you go. Can you hear us now?
Thank you very much for taking my comments. I am a owner of a building at 901 Preston Avenue, which is at the corner of Rose Hill and Preston Avenue, and have spent a lot of time and energy in trying to make this a beautiful and appropriate space. I would love to see a traffic circle that would improve flow without putting more stop signs. Stop signs don't seem to be able to really do what they're supposed to do as far as being able to control flow. I also think that this is a beautiful opportunity to create more green space and mild parks that would be available in that area, and would hopefully be of great benefit to the business community and to the community that lives in that area. So I will look forward to seeing what is being suggested. But of all the suggestions that I've seen, I think that a circle seems to make the most sense to me and would be the most appropriate to handle all of the desires that you currently have suggested. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next up is Tim Patalina. Tim, you're on with city staff. Go ahead, you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thanks to staff. My name's Tim Patalino. I've lived with my family on 9th Street Northwest for about 7 years. Wanted to begin my comments by just expressing my appreciation and gratitude for the city's investment in infrastructure in the 10th and Page and Rose Hill neighborhoods. That seems like it's the right thing to do at the right time and maybe overdue. I also just want to express my agreement with the need and the urgency for these improvements and these investments based on the existing conditions and based on my experiences, as a pedestrian, a bicycle, vehicular movement through this corridor. I just feel like I want to express the critical necessity of trying to address this intersection comprehensively after studying the entire Preston Avenue corridor, at minimum from 10th Street down to all the way to 4th Street where the crossing is and Bodo's and the county office building. I just think there might be a situation where we focus on one particular intersection and miss the opportunity to improve intersections in that corridor in a way that works together comprehensively. I think that's really important. I also just want to express my view of the importance of canopy trees being increased, if at all possible, in this project, whether that's through street trees or through some other grove or cluster of canopy trees. 10th and Page has the lowest tree canopy coverage in the city by far, and some recent development has resulted in the loss of some of the trees in that median median of Preston Avenue, and just want to see if there's an opportunity to incorporate increased canopy trees in this project, whatever it ends up looking like. And then I wanted to also share a question, which is in the schematics that I've seen, there looks to be like a new parcel created within the existing right-of-way. So wanted to understand more clearly if there's a plan for that, or if not, when that plan would be developed or created. So thanks to staff, and I also want to just express my gratitude for a lot of the comments my neighbors have shared, because there's a lot of great feedback being shared. Thank you.
Thank you. And why don't we pause there and see if any of our panelists have a response?
Brian, I can take the back half of that question about the trees and that vacant parcel or piece of land. Those are all aspects that would be determined with increased public outreach once the funding's received. How exactly landscaping would look, if we want canopy trees, or as we talked about earlier, how bike lanes look, if it wants to be a shared use path or buffered bike lanes, separated bike lanes, what to do with those vacant parcels of land once they're created, are all things that we would take a look at and allow the public to have a more detailed say in once we get to that point.
Great. And we have 5 people with their hands raised right now. If you want to join them, just click the raise hand icon in the Zoom webinar. If you're on the telephone, you can press *9 and that'll raise your hand on the phone and we can bring you into the conversation. A couple of the questions that were asked, sometimes if they're a comment, I'll leave that sitting in the queue so that all the panelists can see it, but then we dismiss it to get it out of the way so we can see the new questions coming in. But I don't want you to think that we're judging your questions or your comments. We're just moving them to a different place. They will be part of the archive so that we can all benefit from your insights. Next up tonight is Ralph Brown. Ralph, you're on with city staff and you've got 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, I am a resident of Charlottesville, I'm currently 71 years old. I've written a comment to you guys about the heartburn that I have over the project bringing more traffic into the Grady Avenue neighborhood and how it might impact the African-American community. And my heartburn is because I have watched the city do projects repeatedly over and over again, from what we have across from Jefferson School, which is the Vinegar Hill area. Even Preston Avenue was African-American businesses that just disappeared all the way down Preston, where Bodo's is, and other places, all the way up. Again, my historical look causes me heartburn because in the design that you have, or you propose, or somebody came up with, why you decided to divert traffic into the Grady Avenue area instead of a design that would carry more traffic over Preston Avenue away from Grady Avenue is beyond me. But I don't pretend to understand all of the dynamics of, how this process works out. I heard Mr. Duncan, I believe it is, state that he didn't anticipate much of a change as far as traffic is concerned. People can go to the light and make a turn. And I believe I heard Mr. Kale saying that much of this would be worked out in the steering committees. and at a later time. So what I think I hear you saying is that, well, we'll get the money first and then we can change all of these things. This sounds like a boulder coming down a hill, and you're saying that, well, we can stop it and make changes. I'm suggesting to you that the sacrifice of the African American community this far has been sufficient for the city of Charlottesville to find another way to accomplish this mission. Of course, I have no hope that that's going to happen simply because you've never listened. Now, in the past, the African American community either didn't know how or didn't have the wherewithal to stand up and say, stop, no, you can't do this, or whatever. Okay. Now, in this age of where we can collect signatures and petition and things of that nature, we can come out and protest, but I'm not confident that anybody's still going to be listening. My dad built the house just behind the Trinity Church, the Rock House, and then the next house to it, the duplex on the corner. And when you go into Ross Avenue, several other houses on 12th Street. So much of the neighborhood was built by my dad. But
Mr. Brown, if you could wrap up.
I'm not confident. My conclusion is, I'm not confident that after you get the money, which appears to be what you're saying, is that after you get the money, you can change the design and go another way. So I'm simply suggesting to you that on behalf of those folks that haven't spoken up or been able to speak up, I think you ought to go another way with your design. Not what you have on paper appears to be the way somebody appeared that was best to do. And I'm suggesting that we ought to go another way.
Thank you very much. Okay. Any feedback from our panel at this point? We have 4 additional folks who've raised their hand. If you want to get in line to speak, you can press the raise hand icon in the Zoom webinar. Next up is Phoebe Stevens. Phoebe, you're on with city staff and you've got 3 minutes.
Thank you so much. Hi. I just want to reiterate and echo what Don, Iran, Chris, and previously, just before me, Ralph said. I live on Paoli Street, and I find everything they have said, I fully agree with, but I just want to point out that the traffic calming, I'm from Charlottesville as well, born and raised, and I've watched Charlottesville grow in ways that don't make sense in terms of traffic. So I will just point out, for example, 250 where McIntyre crosses over. Okay, 250 doesn't have traffic anymore, but now traffic on McIntyre is backed up in both directions anytime, pretty much any time during the day. There's also, I have problems with this statement that we don't anticipate traffic going down Grady. They didn't anticipate traffic going up McIntyre in both directions. So I really reject that statement and find that to be poor planning, honestly. You can't say that you don't know, so we don't think it's not going to be a problem. It will be a problem if traffic is diverted in that direction. There are obviously residents who have lived there for a long time, and there's also a lot of student housing there. So now there are people that are going to be driving in that direction, not to mention the dairy building, which we don't even know what that traffic stress is going to be, except to say that we know it's going to be a lot. And when that building was proposed, they reached out to all of us in the community and fed us dinner and wanted to know what we had to say and how we felt and really wanted to reach out to us. And in the end, it didn't matter what anybody in the neighborhood said. Don Gathers was there. We both were trying to say things that nobody was listening to. And so here we have the dairy building, and that's going to put a huge stress on there. And now you're diverting all of that traffic into a neighborhood, where there are kids who plays. There are little, small mom and pop grocery stores, and there are convenience stores that are going to be just swamped. So I find this to be just, I don't know who's thinking this is a good idea, but if you're not going to reach out to the citizens who are going to be directly impacted by this before you go and get the money, and if you say that, for example, these design elements can't change, I just reject that. If you really want it to happen, you can make it happen. We are capable of making things happen. So I think that get back to the drawing board. And I don't know why we don't have a conceptual design of this. I asked for one in the Q&A, and there isn't one. So it makes zero sense to divert traffic to Grady when clearly there is a direct path, wider streets, as Yaron mentioned, with Preston Avenue, businesses and buildings that are farther set off from the road. It makes no sense. So I would like some comment about why the traffic circle is not possible. And again, I understand Lee and Quill, they own the dairy building. Maybe you could sort out buying that spur piece of road there. And as far as green space in the middle, that is pedestrian refuge, no one sits in the green space in the middle of Preston Avenue. No one does. That has never been a thing. And if you have lived here your entire life like I have, you have known people don't go hang out in carbon monoxide infested areas like the median of Preston Avenue. So yeah, so I'm sorry, I reject that, and I would like to hear comment about that, please.
Thank you.
I'll take that, Brian.
Yep.
So again, I'll say again, I was the one who said I don't anticipate traffic because we're dealing with people and their behaviors. I'm not a behavioral expert by any means, but again, it's going to be longer for traffic if they're trying to get to Barracks Road. It's going to be longer for them to go straight onto Grady than to make the right-hand turn. And I listed a half dozen intersections in the city where the predominant movement is, a right or left-hand turn. It's not uncommon at all. And vehicles make that movement without thinking to go straight. They want to go that way. They turn that way. So that's to address that. The pedestrian refuge island is not for people to sit and hang out. It's a mechanism that is used to shorten the time for pedestrians to cross. So essentially, you would get a light that says you cross from one side to the median. Again, with Preston being as wide as it is, the required time, that VDOT and stuff requires to get across is a long time because you're doing it for a slow speed walker. So it would basically allow the lights to switch. You would be able to get to the median, wait through one cycle, and then you'd be able to push the button again to finish the movement. So it's not to sit and hang out in the intersection. It's much more to facilitate safe travel through the intersection while still allowing vehicle movements.
And we've had a few questions about the design concept. Is that something that has been shared or is available?
Oh yeah, we've got it at the end. We can go ahead and pull it up since we've got some questions there.
Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah, let me preface this by saying again, this was, and I've said it in the written comment several times, but this is a concept that was done merely for the facilitation of a budget. In order to apply for funding, we have to have a budget. Someone had brought up roundabout. We looked at doing roundabout for this area as well, but in order to meet the design criteria to install a roundabout, several of those businesses on the west portion, those buildings there, which I believe one of them at least is historic, it would have to be torn down in order to do that. The cost also was prohibitive to do it. I don't remember the exact amount, but as Kyle had stated in the presentation, really we have all of the factors that give us a score or a coefficient, and then that's divided by the price. So the higher the price goes, the lower our ultimate score goes, and the lower our chance of getting state and federal funding is. So what is designed conceptually designed here is kind of a mix of most benefit for lowest cost. Again, where that intersection goes or whatever, what is designed for the open spaces, all of that kind of stuff can be changed. And again, there's a long right-hand turn lane there. If you look at that concept, showing all those vehicles that would be proposed to turn onto Preston towards Barracks.
And just to orient people, I'm sure everyone on this call and who's been giving feedback knows the orientation, but at the top is the Shenandoah Joe's building. At the bottom is the Dairy Central project. Over on the right side is Sticks Kebab Shop and the other shops in that area. And then the Legal Aid Justice Center is off to the left. Any other landmarks we need to point out? Okay, we've got 5 people with their hand raised right now. Next up is Carl Schwartz. Carl, you're on with city staff.
You hear me?
3 minutes. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So the entire Preston corridor needs improvement, and this was stated in the Streets That Work plan. Per that plan, per your slide that you put up, the corridor extends from Harris to 10th. That's basically the area that's got 2 lanes on either side of a median. This road has been broken since it was installed in the 60s. It's bottlenecked at every end. It's like some of the other roads in the city. It's a highway to nowhere. If you look at your own crash slide, you'll know that there's quite a few collisions at 8th Street. The zoning on either side is much denser than what already exists. The whole area demands much more closer study and genuine community engagement that extends beyond just that intersection design. If you really want to try to restitch together 10th and Page and Rose Hill and fix what was done in the 60s. VDOT grants require VDOT adherence. Perhaps solutions to Preston are not what VDOT would typically approve. What guarantees us that the results of this intersection project won't increase speeds on the rest of Preston or further cut off intersections along Preston? I find it especially concerning that even if this is a placeholder design, part of its awfulness is due to the adherence to typical traffic engineering standards that prioritize the vehicle. And Brennan, you said it yourself right there that, as describing why a roundabout wouldn't work, it didn't meet standard engineering standards. We're stuck with that if we go with a VDOT grant. I'm not saying a VDOT grant is a bad thing. It's great to get free money, and getting the free money for community engagement as well. But I think we should know ahead of time what we want for this intersection before we go ahead and lock ourselves into something. We don't want to be stuck with something that could preclude a more comprehensive solution to the entire corridor. As for the steering committees, I've sat on 2 of these so far. Public outreach is typically not that great. There are open houses, but they often feel a lot like just checking off boxes. The designers will put up 3 options and, you put your little sticker on one of them, but everything's kind of predetermined and there's a couple small options left to figure out. Usually on the first day, members almost always propose something interesting or, a better solution. And almost always the answer is, no, that's beyond the scope of the project. We can't do that. So to me, it feels like you guys really the city needs to do a small area plan. You guys you've got a whole bunch of small area plans that need to be done. This one does need to be done sooner than later. I don't know why it can't happen before the comp plan is finished. I know that the answer to all this usually is, let's wait till the comprehensive plan is finished and then we'll get on with doing all these other things. Just fold it into the comp plan. It's happened with others. I'm rambling at this point, but I'm just, to echo what's been said, what was said on that petition that you've received. This really does deserve a comprehensive study before you guys really focus in on any small portion of it. Thank you.
Carl, if I can address a few of those. First of all, the engineering guidelines, we have to follow whether this was state federally funded or all city funds. Those guidelines, there's really not a lot of wiggle room. And I'm talking AASHTO federal guidelines that it doesn't matter what we build, we have to follow those. Secondly, I posted this in one comment, I believe, in an ideal world, I would agree with you that a full corridor plan would already be done. but we have the opportunity for funding, and we've had an opportunity to do a comprehensive plan in the city for, 20 years, and it hasn't happened. So, how long are we going to put off this intersection, which again, when we did the Streets That Work, this was the #1 intersection in the city that's been bad. We have a chance to improve it. We have a good chance to get funding to do this. And the funding's not going to come for 5 years. That gives us a chance, if we do get the funding, that a small area plan or comp plan could, be done between now and then, and, have a chance to address those issues. We can design the intersection in such a way that if a road diet happened, on the corridor, that it would be able to tie in without too much. There's a lot of design considerations that can be, worked out so that if we do something at this intersection, it doesn't preclude doing something further down the corridor.
And we still have a lot of questions coming in via the Q&A module. We've answered 26 of those. So if you want to take advantage of what's visible there, you can learn from others who've been asking questions. We have 4 people who have their hands raised right now. We have about 30 minutes remaining in today's webinar. Next up is Valerie Long. Valerie, you're on with city staff and you've got 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Brian. And I want to just also echo my appreciation for you all taking the time to do this. And obviously the public engagement is really important for this and all projects like this. And I know this has been stated a couple different ways, but I just want to reiterate that on the one hand, we hear you. You're saying there's going to be lots more time for community engagement in the future. But at the same time, it's clear that you're saying the scope of any future changes will be limited, very limited. The design elements have to stay and the budget has to stay. And I know that's part of my concern. And I think I hear that in a lot of other comments and questions as well, that, the future public engagement process will not be very meaningful if the basic design elements have already been locked in place and the budget's locked in place. Then we'll just, yes, we can talk about bike lanes and so forth, but then at that point you're tinkering around the edges and not looking at the comprehensive issue. And I think the community is saying we don't want that scope of future design changes to be so limited. They want to make sure this is done right. Especially you talked about how scarce and competitive the funding is under Smart Scale, which I know is the case. And I get this is a long time need, but let's not rush into it just because there's a good chance to get the money this year. Let's make sure it's done right, because otherwise it's going to be another 40, 50 years before we get a chance to look at this again. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up we have Vice Mayor Sina McGill. Sina, you're on with city staff. Go ahead.
I'm not there as vice mayor today. I'm simply here as a resident. This is where, I've spent 16 years living and dealing with this intersection. At first, city staff, thank you very much for being here after 5 o'clock. I really appreciate it. And the community engagement side. I do also appreciate that this is a very difficult intersection. Having dealt with this intersection for 40 plus years now, what I'm hearing from people, and one thing that I am also concerned about is while I know we have this opportunity to get the funding, once we get that funding, again, we end up becoming locked in place to a certain extent. And this does worry me that then that intersection and how we design that intersection with the funds ends up dictating the way that we are looking at the community as a whole. And then instead of the vision for the community of 10th and Page dictating the intersection, it's the intersection that starts dictating the vision of the community. And I think fundamentally that's some of the things I'm hearing from a number of people is what they're concerned about. And that if we if this does proceed through the Smart Scale grant, just to make sure at least that enough is put in there to address the needs that we really think that intersection needs. Whether it means protected bike lanes, whether it means protected walking. I mean, it wasn't until my child was 12, I wouldn't let her walk to Venable from school because I was afraid of how she would end up crossing in areas. I'm still not seeing some of that pedestrian protection in place with this design. And I want to be bringing those forward because that's just my concern. And thank you again very much though for all the work you have put into this. I know it's difficult also translating engineering to lay people, myself being one of them. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any comments from the panel? All right. We have two people with their hands raised at this point. We've got about 20 minutes left. If you want to raise your hand, just click that icon at the bottom of the webinar screen. Next up is Tatesa Gathers. Ms. Gathers, you're on with city staff. You've got 3 minutes.
Thank you, Brian. I was born on 13th Street. I have left and went to the county and came back and lived in the city probably since the 80s, probably pretty much in the same home. I must say that I'm a little frustrated because the design that's going on Main Street, feel like this is just pushing back on that to try to work on Preston. And I'm in between them both. So it feels like a squeeze going on. And then you have not anything to do with you all, of course, but then I have people outside that's even calling to say, can I buy your house? And all these little cards coming in. Feels like it's just trying to push you out. And the only thing that I keep hearing is bikes, bikes, bikes. What about children on bikes? What happened when kids used to just ride and be comfortable riding? Now you're going to have it so congested with cars. We got the dairy with all of this construction and everything going on where, I'm sorry, I feel like you're forgetting the people. We keep going into these new designs and these new things happening, and you're just not, I mean, even though you're doing this public comment, thank you. But what does that mean? Is it a checkbox just to make sure that you have talked to the community just to do what you wanted to do in the first place? I just don't understand this all. And I'm just voicing my opinion and letting you know that it feels like a squeeze play, no matter which way it goes. And I feel like our hands are tied either way. You're going to change it. You're going to make it what you want it to be. And even though we're giving you feedback, you know, I want to make sure that you're going to actually hear that people are saying this is too congested. Your plan is too congested, or that it doesn't fit the businesses around here, it doesn't fit our children around here, it doesn't fit our community. Why are we doing this, basically? And I haven't seen the why yet. What brought this on? I keep hearing after study, but who's studying? And the only thing I saw in the write-up said 20% of problems. What about the 80% that has been positive? Thank you.
Thank you. Would one of our staff like to recap some of the highlights of the why on this project?
Sure, I guess I can do that. Again, it really kind of goes back to the Streets That Work plan. That was like a 3 or 4 year community engagement plan of, you know, making streets that work for our community. You know, what are the important pieces of it? You know, how do we classify our streets? How do we want our streets in the city to look? And then where are the problem spots, you know, that where we have them today. And this intersection, again, was the #1 intersection that had issues revolving around traffic, congestion, and pedestrian movement. So the why of this project is to try and address mainly those 3 elements.
And Ms. Gathers, I see you've got your hand up again. Did you have a final thought?
Oh, yeah, sure. Only piece that I'll say is that we didn't ask you 3 or 4 years ago. I'm just not understanding what's going on now.
Thank you. Next up, Beth Meyer. Beth, you're on with city staff and you've got 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Thanks, Brian, and appreciate everybody being here. I'm going to repeat a few things that several neighbors and colleagues have said, and gets back to our conversation tonight, putting the cart before the horse. This is an urban design and a neighborhood design problem. This is not a road design problem. And the conversation seems so counter to what was promised in the Charlottesville Plan Together conversations that were started last month, where all the plans in the city would be discussed and presented in light of issues of equity and building community. I have great respect for the city engineers on the staff, but a project like this is not singular in function, it's multifunctional. And the most important thing is the ease of movement for all bodies, not just for cars, and for the connectivity between the 10th and Page neighborhood and the historic park that is so fundamental to its identity, to Washington Park. I would like to argue that part of the problem today is that the scope is limited both in time and in space. Without understanding the history of this site, the relationship between 10th and Page, 10th Street, the University Hospital that extended 10th Street for better access through the neighborhood up to Preston. Without understanding that history, you can't actually create a design that works. And I think we're also limited because we're not looking in the future. This plan seems like it's designed for 1980s car use. I really can't believe in 10 or 15 years, we're going to be concerned about getting quickly from downtown to Barracks Road Shopping Center in an automobile. So I would really urge everyone to just take a deep breath, step back, don't submit the grant now, demonstrate that we know how to plan Charlottesville together. Not through public works alone and transportation, not through neighborhood services alone, but together with the neighborhoods and our residents. There's no rush here. There'll be money here in 2 years. And frankly, the longer it takes for us to plan this, the closer we'll be to a culture where the car is not driving our decisions, but the healthy movement of children and all kinds of bodies on sidewalks will be the primary thing that's driving our decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. We have one member of the audience whose microphone was not working, Reed Murphy, and I promised Reed that I would read his statement here. He says, "It looks to me like the city has overweighted cost at the expense of optimal design. As planners, we have the obligation to think long-term. I understand the city needs and wants funding for this project, but to do it hastily and less than optimally will actually cost more in the long run. Seville should be willing to pay more now to get it right, knowing that how we design this intersection will shape our community for generations to come. I think we need to pursue the absolute best solution and then figure out how to pay for it." And that was Reed Murphy. If there are others that would like to raise their hand, we've got about 15 minutes left. You can click the raise hand icon at the bottom of the screen. And we have some repeat customers raising their hands. If there's anyone who has not raised their hand yet, I'm going to take you first. And then with the balance of time, we'll certainly take any other comments. All right, first up is Lee Ayers. Lee, you're on the city staff and you've got 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks, Brian. My name is Ian Ayers. I'm Lee's wife, and we were just reviewing the graphic, and we were concerned that the queuing of cars that is heading downtown from Barracks is going to really stack up there. you know, with the addition of a lot of traffic to the hospital on 10th Street, the 2 lanes, right, the dedicated turn lane to the left going down Preston, is that going to, you know, queue up really far and congest the intersection? Excuse me, the you know, the upstream intersection across from closer to the Shenandoah Joe's. You know, has a study been done to see how that's going to queue up during peak times? Because I feel like that's just going to make it a real big hassle. I mean, we walk there almost 5-6 days a week, and with all the cars queuing in both directions, it strikes me that this is not going to achieve kind of an even flow for cars. I was a former systems engineer at UVA, and I did some traffic studies at the Emmett Street intersection, the Emmett and University Ave intersection, and it was just surprised what you can learn by an exhaustive study with, you know, real modeling. So can you speak to the degree of certainty you have that the congestion won't make it harder in some instances to get around than the current design? Yeah, I yield back my time, or whatever that is.
Thank you. So we had some questions there about level of certainty and congestion.
Yeah, so again, this was a conceptual design and we did kind of conceptual traffic study. So a full-blown analysis of what the conceptual design would do has not been done. But we did enough to kind of have good level of understanding that this design isn't going to make it any worse than what is there today, at least for vehicles. We know that it will be better for pedestrians than it is today, because today for pedestrians is absolutely atrocious. So it's really hard to make it worse for pedestrians than it is today. Yeah.
Okay. Next up, we have City Councilor Lloyd Snook. Lloyd, you're on with city staff. Go ahead.
Thank you. And I also am not officially calling as city councilor because I think it's important to know that city council has not looked at this proposal. It's still so conceptual at this point, but I'm just curious, has there been any kind of a detailed traffic study done to know how many cars are going through that intersection, in which direction, how many people are going through from, let's say, from Barracks Road to downtown or back? How many people are going from downtown to the university via Grady? How many are making the turn from, you know, coming east, probably is coming west on Preston to turn left onto 10th Street? Has that kind of detailed study been done?
Yes, it has. I've actually got it right in front of me here. Are there any specific quadrants that you want the numbers for?
I mean, frankly, from the traffic perspective, I haven't looked at the Streets at Work plan. That was done a few years ago, and I haven't looked at it. But I'm trying to think of what the traffic problem is that this is intended to solve. I drive through the neighborhood from time to time, probably 3 or 4 times a week. I know it's got some traffic associated with it, but it hasn't, as far as I've never really had the sense, gee, I've got to wait through 2 turns of a traffic light. So if I'm thinking about, is this a big traffic problem? I don't think of it as a big traffic problem. Maybe it's a big safety problem for reasons that are not clear to me. But so I'm really just curious, because it seems to me that it's really going to slow down through traffic if that's what you want to do, the traffic going to and from downtown, by having to make the turn that you've got there. And again, I haven't done the study. I don't know. I'm just asking.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're traveling west on Preston, it's about a 50-50 split of the vehicles that continue straight towards Barracks versus turn left towards either Grady or 10th Street. So that's about a 50-50 split. And the 50% that continues straight through to Barracks represents about 20% of all of the vehicles that are coming into the intersection. So in the peak hour, we did both AM and PM peak hours. In the PM peak hour, there's about 2,000, just over 2,000 vehicles in the hour, which is 1.5 to 2 vehicles every second. So there is a lot of movement going through here. Again, so in raw numbers, we're talking 600 to 900 vehicles per hour that are kind of coming up Preston. You've got between 300 and 500 on 10th Street. You've got between right around 200 to 250 on Grady, and then anywhere from 400 to 600 on the barracks kind of quadrant coming in. So although it seems like a lot of the vehicles are on Preston, a lot of those vehicles are making turning movements. So, again, you've got 900 vehicles coming in, and then you end up with 400 or 500 that are leaving, but 300 of those go straight through, and another 200 are coming from either Grady or 10th. So that, there's already a lot of turning movements at this intersection, and a lot of those movements, if you're coming from 10th Street, you're going through two lights to make your movement. And a lot of the accidents that happen along this corridor are on the kind of that spur that goes in front of the Dairy Central building. And they're trying to merge highway style onto Preston by looking over their left shoulder. So actually there's probably 4 or 5 times the amount of vehicles that try and bypass the light down that spur than there are that actually come up to Preston and then make the right-hand turn. So again, by consolidating the lights from 2 into 1, we gain more green time for the whole intersection, so that the vehicles, won't be waiting as long, even though we're forcing them to wait at the light, versus taking that spur and trying to, merge into traffic while it's moving. Hopefully that answers some of the question.
We've got time for 2 more speakers who have got their hands raised, and then we will make sure you understand the next steps and the opportunities for continued engagement with the city on this project. Next up is Samuel Carron, and I believe you spoke earlier, but we're going to give you another chance to make a comment here. Sam, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to state a little bit of the obvious from my perspective in the gentrification of this entire area. The neighborhood that's there now is not going to be the neighborhood that we're going to see in another 5 or 10 years. We've already seen a lot of changes. We've already witnessed a number of buildings that have been destructed and constructed. So this is a changing area. I would like to honor what has been a predominantly African-American community to figure out how we can end up being able to preserve as much as possible the nature of the community. I also am concerned about the businesses along that side. Of all the ways you could have constructed that road, I think the one that you have got up there right now is probably, from my mind, not one of the best. Could be, from my mind, the worst as far as the actual community businesses that are along that corridor. And I would hope that we would be able to look long-sighted at this. But I happen to think if you're going to do something to try and just deal with the traffic, do a straight through all the way through and let them turn to go on Grady. And that would be much better than what you currently suggested. That right turn going up there to go back into is a disaster from my point of view. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And our last comment tonight will be from Ralph Brown. Ralph, you're on with city staff. You've got 3 minutes. And you'll have to unmute your microphone. There you go. Go ahead.
I know I had a chance to speak before, but I'm just curious as to whether I'm in the right forum. Are you guys all about the traffic and the project, and not about the neighborhood at all? I'm not sure whether this is the right time, or whether you have the ability to be sensitive to what's going on in the neighborhood. It appears to me, from the majority of the conversation, is that you guys are all about the traffic and which way the traffic's going to flow and how this, which in my mind, as someone has mentioned earlier, Dairy Central hasn't even opened yet. So we haven't even begun to review how much traffic is going to pour into this neighborhood already because of the Dairy Central. So I'm not sure whether my question is whether you can consider, or whether any of you have the ability to say, okay, this is not good for the neighborhood, so let's do something else. Is that something that you can do, or are you simply commissioned to fix the problem with the roads and the streets and which direction the traffic flows? And I appreciate all the effort that as city staff that you have to go into putting these things together. So I don't want to seem insensitive myself, but it appears to me that this is not something that you are able to even address. Am I correct?
So the charge from City Council was to take the Streets That Work plan and to try and get as much state and federal funding to address those issues as possible. If City Council chooses, this project will not move forward. This is not a staff decision as to whether it moves forward. We can't do it without City Council's blessing, but we're moving forward with the direction that we've received in the past of, take the top priorities from City Council and try and move those forward.
Great.
So,
Ralph, I cut you off right as you started the sentence. Go ahead.
yeah. So as a follow-up, I guess what you're saying is that if we have concerns about the neighborhood, we should be in the City Council chamber now, making it clear to City Council what we don't want, so that when this comes to the table, it gets addressed, and we should not even be in this forum talking about what we feel about the neighborhood. Is that a correct assessment?
I mean, if there's something specific to the design that you feel should be included that we're leaving out, an element of something that we're not taking into account, we have time to add that. The application has to be in by the end of August. So there's not time, or beginning of August. So there's not time for, a whole lot of change at this point to what we're trying to accomplish. But if for whatever reason, council pulls it, we've got another 2 years to try and revamp this. But again, unless you guys are continually at City Council pushing for funding for a small area plan, we could be in this exact same spot 2 years from now with no small area plan and, an application trying to get funding again.
And thank you, Mr. Brown, for your comments throughout the evening. And I just want to point out there are a number of staff who are not panelists on the webinar who are participants tonight. So there are a lot of people on city staff, and as you heard, 2 members of City Council who were also paying attention. And Alex, I'm going to put up the next steps slide in a second, but maybe if you could just give some general feedback about neighborhood development and how that kind of feedback about a neighborhood and a project like this is considered by staff and council.
Well, usually a project like this gets approval from the City Council before submission to Department of Transportation. For instance, when council meets on July 20th, staff will be requesting from the City Council a resolution of support. At that point, folks can send their concerns as well to the City Council. We've taken note of the concerns raised tonight. And Council can, at their meeting next month, decides, like Brennan noted, that there has to be a further evaluation of the corridor before we submit the application. So we have to wait for another 2 years. However, if Council decides that the concerns raised can be addressed during the planning process, Council can approve the resolution, and then staff will attach that resolution to the application early in August to be sent to Department of Transportation for funding consideration. So that is the process in terms of submitting the smart scale application. And then, of course, if it's funded, then we'll have a more robust community engagement process subsequent after the funding is approved.
So a few reminders there. You've got a slide on the screen right now with some next steps, but we do have a survey. We'll be sending out a link to this survey to all the participants on the webinar. We'll do that tomorrow. You'll also get an email from Zoom thanking you for participating. If you hit reply on that, I believe it comes straight back to me. So if you have any comments or questions you want to add, feel free to reply to that email from Zoom, and I will make sure these 4 staff members receive your feedback. Anything else that the panel wants to add before we say goodnight?
I think if on the information on the website, if anyone has some additional comments, or those who didn't have the opportunity to provide comments tonight, they can go to this website and send their concerns by email to Kyle Kling, the project manager. His information is on the website, including his email address and telephone number.
Excellent. And we'll also send out the slides, as I mentioned earlier. Thank you. We had a lot of participation tonight. Over 50 people were on for most of the evening, so we really appreciate that engagement and all the wonderful feedback we've been able to document tonight. So thank you very much, and hope everyone has a good evening.
Thank you, Brian, for hosting this.
You're welcome.